what other kind of game really gives you such a structure and a scope for storytelling and for using your imagination? From my perspective as a homeschool parent, I'm going, that's the kind of the educator's dream, to be able to teach your kids how to write and how to tell stories.
Hey everybody, it's Jason. This is Rachel. Husband and wife team for Weatherford Daze. We're so glad that you could join us again. Every week we bring you the top tier content you've always wanted, or is it just people that love hanging out together and talking and having a good time, and we just happen to record it?
That's pretty much it.
This was a listener request. Is that that sounds like we're like radio DJs. We got a listener request.
We had a listener and he requested
A
something.
viewer, yeah.
We actually had a viewer, so
we have a good amount, but all right. So what are we talking about? Well, I'll tell you what we're talking about. You want to hold it? You like it? It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool.
It is.
Don't you like that?
It's a nice fidget, actually.
It is. Hey, even when I'm not rolling in the game that we're about to talk about, I sometimes will just flip it around and roll it around. Everybody, check it out. Ooh. Okay.
Ethan actually likes to play with these too when we let him.
Oh no. Do you want to kind of?
So, Dungeons and Dragons.
Dungeons and Dragons.
But more specifically, just tabletop gaming, right? That was the
tabletop role-playing games, I think.
Yeah, tabletop gaming, role-playing, the art of storytelling.
Improvisational storytelling,
right?
Specifically.
So this was on our Magic episode specifically, kind of a follow-up to that, because this is another one that has been pretty controversial among Christians, is the whole D&D RPG games type thing. I get it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, it's hard for you to say that you get it because it's been such a part of your life for so long. You really enjoy playing RPGs.
But I can kind of step outside and look at it from that perspective. But also the reasoning behind some of the controversies were, during the 70s and 80s and 90s were, I'd say late 70s is when it got started, but we'll talk about that.
I think
they're not as founded in pure fact. It's more emotion.
Yeah, part of it is just people not really understanding what it is that you're doing, right? A lot of people will just kind of look at the artwork or the whole idea of Dungeons, Dragons, the
wizards
and all of that, and go, oh no,
killing stuff,
there's
looting.
It's kind of like with Harry Potter, there's kind of an automatic knee-jerk reaction when you have anything that's looks like witchcraft, that most Christians will just be like, no, I'll stay away from it. And I mean, if that's you, then okay,
Right.
But actually looking at what it does, the more that I learned about RPGs, the more that I really went, oh wow, there's, this is kind of cool.
When did you learn a lot about it? What was your exposure to it growing up, and then later on with me and our kids? Or what's your history with it?
I didn't really know much about RPGs until I met you. And when
hopefully I've been a good ambassador for the hobby.
I mean, I knew people that played RPGs, but it wasn't really I had never had an opportunity to play.
Any youth groups or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
I went to very small churches growing up, and they
strictly very strict,
very
conservative.
strict. Yeah. I mean, the people that I knew probably were after I moved here for college, and met some people that were a little bit more just.
Your brother played, but when did he get into it? Matt, my brother Matt, by the way. Yeah.
I have no idea when he got into it.
Well, I don't know when he got into it, but
Yeah.
when did you know that he
And
was playing?
well, and that's something that I think that I don't actually know whether our parents are really super on board with RPGs either. That was something that I don't know that we ever really discussed them growing up, or at least not with me. They might have with the younger boys. I come from a family of 7 kids. I was the 3rd in line, and then there were 3 boys after me that kind of did things together, and then another girl. So,
So what was
yeah.
there? We talked about this a little bit in the Magic and Christians episode, but what if they haven't had a exposure to role playing games? They had exposure to you reading Lord of the Rings or The
Mhm.
Hobbit, and
Yeah.
also the Harry Potter stuff. When did you when were you reading Harry Potter? Was that mostly
Harry
after you got
Potter
a?
was after I moved.
Okay, so they didn't.
Right. I mean, we played some computer games and that kind of stuff that probably had some elements.
A little bit. You are kind of portraying a role in it,
Yeah.
but it's not purely. You're with video games. You're very within within their highway. You have to drive on their highway. With role playing games, you go, well, I'm not going to go on the highway. Let's go off this way, and it's very adaptable. The computer game engine for the computer is the game master is the general term, but dungeon master is the term that's used in D&D, and they give you feedback as to what's happening. You say what you want to happen. They tell you how difficult it is. We're kind of really talking about
Yeah.
what role playing
I
games are,
think,
really, aren't we?
yeah. I think that Dungeons and Dragons, from when I first heard of it, I thought that it was like an adult game, right?
Adults were the first ones to start
Yes,
playing it
but
back in the late 70s.
I did
Yes.
not think that it was something that was kid
Or
friendly
what? I don't know
or
how old.
appropriate for
I don't know
kids.
how old the creators were back in the late 70s. I wonder if they were like in their early 20s. Okay,
So
but go ahead.
even
Yeah.
leaving out like the magic aspect of it, I thought that it was like adult themed and not really appropriate.
You
And that's
can
something that,
make it kid appropriate if you alter
yeah,
some things with
but
it, really.
I didn't realize what the beyond just seeing some of the artwork and stuff and hearing people talk about it, I didn't realize that RPGs was, I didn't realize that there was a world of different types of RPGs. It was very limited. So when I met
Yeah.
you and, you kind of told me what happened and that it's a storytelling. And then actually, I read a book series that had been written off of, was it Dragonlance? Something like that?
Okay, Dragonlance. Yes.
It's
Okay,
written from an
it's
RPG.
yeah,
So
that's Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman wrote the Dragonlance series, and it's based out of the world that and the content of Dungeons and Dragons. It's not really a game, although there are game supplements where you can play in that world of Dragonlance. But those all those books, you
is that the
can
one that I'm thinking about though? That it was
Raceland
basically
and Caramon.
they had
Yeah, the
done a thing
Draconians.
and then they wrote
Yeah.
the book based off of their
Mishakal. Yeah,
game.
now I'm thinking about all that. I did not. I only read a couple of those, and I liked them a lot.
Yeah.
But my ADD, I'm going to go back and read those. But
Yeah.
yes,
But that was kind of, when I read those and realized, through talking to you and kind of seeing what it was, I realized, hey, this is actually really cool. It's a whole different kind of game. And, me, of course, I just went, oh, telling stories, but it's telling stories within a structure with these rules.
it
And
goes back and forth
yeah.
with
And
the yeah,
then,
yeah.
sorry.
Oh, no, I love it. And then
But then, like, the
yeah,
thing that next made me really fascinated by them is realizing, after we had our boys diagnosed with autism and Asperger's, realizing that this was actually a tool that was being utilized for kids on the spectrum that
high school groups.
yeah,
Yeah,
high school groups and stuff, that you
came up.
actually had the social interaction and stuff within these rules and these boundaries that they were able to grasp and to understand the structure of it, and yet be very imaginative and then learn the social with it too. I feel like just a lot of kids on the spectrum, and not all, obviously, but a lot of kids, higher functioning especially,
And high
there's
functioning
just
autistic
something
adults
that
can all, yeah.
sparks that, the whole way, the structure of it that just fascinates them. And
And one thing is, and of course, if you know that word role playing, that word is actually used in psychological circles,
mhm,
because what they'll do is they'll say, Rachel, you role play as Jason, and you say what he would say, and somehow you also reveal the things you think about
mhm.
me. And when and sometimes that can pull things out of the surface. But role playing, if you're
Well,
sitting
role
down,
playing helps you to prepare for situations in the
yes.
real world, right?
So
When you've
what if
got,
you are
it's like if you're
playing a
going
very
to
social
go,
person in the game, but you're not very social?
mhm,
That is something we've actually had to work through, is because one of my sons, he's playing a very gregarious, charismatic, heroic, noble dragonborn, which is like a dragon person. And sometimes he's always saying the very, the thing that gets people kind of like, yes, we can do this. And sometimes the our dungeon master will kind of say, okay, what would you say? Say it in character. And when he does so, he's like, I don't know what, and he kind of, but he's getting better and better at it. So what
mhm,
I'm seeing, so if you watch this later, buddy, thumbs up. But he's getting better and better with coming out of the shell on that, and his jokes are more confident. I think just
mhm.
him joking around, not in character, but just being himself. It's coming out, and I'm seeing some good things. Even whatever you might think of this, I think there are some benefits just in socialization.
Mhm.
In a lot of the newer manuals for Dungeons and Dragons, they actually talk about how to play with people who are neurodivergent or have different needs. They actually bake into some of the rules some optional things that you can say, well, if somebody's having a triggering moment, they're dealing with like in real world, they're reacting to what's in the game, then you can kind of put a pause, or you can kind of just move away from that. Don't describe it in detail. There's some things you can do to work with people's emotions. A lot of the old school players that are really set in their ways and they're unadaptable to that, sometimes they balk at some of those, those kind of rules. But for me, you're playing with people, and people are very diverse. You need to find a way to play the game, but also know that you're playing with other people. And it's not just about your style and what you like, it's also what they like too. And we have to learn how to do that as peoples, to work together to tell stories, because the goal of Dungeons and Dragons is not to win. It's not a game. They say, oh, how do you win at that game? You win by telling great stories. And those stories can have moments of tragedy or loss. What if you fail to defeat the dragon? What if you have to run? Did you win? Well, did you tell a great story? Is there more drama to be had? Like, maybe we need to build an army. Maybe we need to get the townsfolk and train them how to be warriors so they can help us. Maybe there's an answer somewhere. So that's what I'm saying, is it's not a game you win or lose. You win by working together, having a good time, telling a good story. Because if you're not having fun, you're not doing something right.
Bouncing back just a little bit, because we kind of went over what we see as some of the
The
benefits,
good things, yeah.
right, to us specifically, but the controversies, I mean, thinking about, some of the potential negatives, when you write a story or when you read a story, you're kind of passive in what's happening. It's happening to other people, it's happening around you. You can disassociate. So if someone is doing something evil, if they're practicing, if they're casting magic, spells, that kind of thing, it's outside of you. It's not you doing it. Whereas when you're role playing, you actually are putting yourself into that, and you're living that. So if you're casting a spell, I can see why people would be, there's that question mark of like, are you participating in magic?
I can speak to that. Early in some of the early manuals, okay, early Dungeons and Dragons manuals, they had some elements in there that were inspired by real world stuff. It wasn't as if it was a handbook for how to cast spells. No, but it used some real world things.
Mhm.
And I think that as parents push back from that, they would like, hey, let me read that, young son or young daughter or whatever. Let me look at that. And they goes, oh, I don't know if I like that. Dungeons and Dragons actually changed some of their elements to work within that. Let's say words like devils or demons, which are actually two different supernatural species. They changed the name, and some of you will know what they are. It's the Tanari and the Batezu, and they made them like a species, a supernatural evil species. So instead of saying, and there are spells that are called summon or banish, and those are some things that you might find in witchcraft. But a lot of those elements that had real world kind of connections, they kind of went away and they made it more fantastical. They didn't talk about you have to do this and that and the other to make it happen. They kind of pulled back from that a lot. Certain classes, like there's a class called Assassin. They took that out of the game. I think second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons took that out. I think based upon, they wanted to kind of play nicey nice with the parents. Other one was Necromancer. That was no
You don't
longer.
want to feel like a game is teaching your child to be a bad guy, right? You don't want them to be taught how to be a villain and
Yeah.
actually acting it out and living it, because it becomes a very real thing.
But they do expect that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in the beginning of the books, it'll say, these things are fantastical.
Mhm.
Please do not. In some of the books, it says the supernatural is talked about in this book. This is not meant to give a thumbs up or thumbs
Yeah.
down, to any of that.
Well,
They have to do that for, kind of purposes.
ultimately, it is just about like any other thing in this world, right? Anything that you create or you participate in, anything that has to do with other people, it's about what you make of it, and it's about what the group that you're in is making of it. If you're in with a group that is working towards something good, that has a strong moral compass, that you may have those places where it's like, oh, I'm going to do something evil, but there's still the recognition that it's evil. It's about the way that it's talked about and presented. And I mean, just like anything else, I think, if you've got kids that are playing, have adult supervision, but that's like literally everything, I think. And, it gives you a way to connect in and do something as a family. I mean, for us, that's been great.
Have you seen the
But
videos online with the wife has a camera around the corner? She's filming her
mhm,
husband, and he's playing with the two daughters.
mhm.
And I can just tell that he's like, I really like Dungeons and Dragons, but I have nobody to play with right now. So I'm going to play with them. So he starts
Well,
saying,
you're training up a child in the way they should
oh,
go,
come on. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What other kind of game really gives you such s- a structure and a scope for storytelling and for using your imagination? From my perspective as a homeschool parent, I'm going, that's the kind of the educator's dream, to be able to teach your kids how to write and how to tell stories, is to
That's how
have
I
a
fell in love with
structure.
statistics and probability because of role. I aced that course that I took in college because I was like so into statistics and probability. And there was
So with storytelling, and I mean, you've
there's
got
there is math with it,
a math too,
and don't
yeah.
let that throw you off and go, well, I'm not really good at math. Let me tell you that if you wanted to play, you have to know how to add and
I don't
subtract
think there's
numbers.
anybody that's just bad at math. It's whether you're practiced at it or
Can you
not.
add or subtract numbers and multiply and divide, which you'll use a lot less, but subtracting and and can you decide to make one statistic higher than another, and what does that mean? Do you want to be stronger or do you want to be faster? And see, that's another element too. There's something I'm going to show you later that talks about this after the episode. You'll enjoy. Hopefully, you will. But sometimes it pays to have a character with flaws, to have stats that are not so great, because it gives you an opportunity not just to win, like I said, not to win all the time, but tell a story around why your character is not so fast. Maybe they're really smart, and that's kind of their wheelhouse. So that's kind of those are some of those elements. Is you're portraying a character that's not you, and so but why are they the way they are? And those are things you can think about. You come up with their history. You can come up with all those different things about them. You don't have to portray them in character and use a voice, but some people that I've seen that play have a lot of fun when they do that. So that can be a good thing. So we've talked about the benefits of that, and we were going to talk about the controversy. Let's go ahead and go into talking about that. There are some famous stories that were blamed on Dungeons and Dragons, and they got national coverage. And there were specifically two cases that people talked about a lot, and they did involve someone taking their own life. And it was blamed on the game. And there was a thought process that these young people involved in this tragically could not separate fantasy from reality. And but that was all story that was created after the fact. After they discovered that this happened, they then blamed the game, and it was off to the races after that. You had some parents who had lost a child, and they didn't know anything else to do but to fight against the thing that had killed their child. And so you had a group that came up in the 80s called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, BAD for short. That's a really creative name for a group. But at the same time, they put out documentation all over the place about how this was just the devil and it was just the worst thing ever. And there was no real evidence that people that played this game more would end their lives more. In fact, the statistics came out later that people that played these games were less likely to do those things. And I think probably because they had a community around them and people that they had that outlet where they could be someone else other than themselves. Maybe they were struggling with different things and this was a way to work it out. Whereas me and Rachel I can speak for you, you sounded like you agreed that we saw some good things come out of this. If you just, let's take away the fact that there's fantasy and spells and stuff. That's with Dungeons and Dragons. There are hundreds of other games of varying levels of themes and subject matter. I mean, if you're into science fiction, you could play that. If you're into mysteries, you could do that. There's all different kinds of games out there that you can play. And there's even Christian role playing games. Because of those controversies, they have been around for a long time. But I think that they've kind of quieted down over the years, and that there's always something else that people are going to focus their ire on and blame for tragedies happening. I think it's a shame that the 80s and 90s were like that. So that's kind of where some of the controversies were, is those things during the 80s when everything was satanic cults and there was all the different kind of things going around. And I'm not to say there weren't evil things going on during those time frames. Even now, I'm not saying those things aren't happening. What I'm saying is that where did that come
People
from?
can turn things towards evil, or they can turn things towards good, I think is my takeaway from it. Is anything in this life can be that way. Food, it's essential for life, but it can be turned towards evil. And I think that anything that has the potential for great good also has the potential for great evil. That's not to say just that there aren't things that are just evil and we should stay away from as Christians, but Dungeons and Dragons or RPGs in general are a tool for creativity, for telling a story, for, it gives you a structure to do that in. That is good at its heart. To get creative, to get with a group of people and to tell a story together. Not only can it just be kind of a neutral, you can just tell a story, but you can also come together and tell something really creative and really, morally complex and just with such a value, such a learning thing for everybody. You can turn people's brains on, spark their imagination in such a cool way.
And group matters.
Mhm.
Group matters. Just like any game that you want to sit down with. I will tell you, I play Dungeons and Dragons with my son, my two daughters, and some other people that I met, and they're all Christians. And we talked about this beforehand, just in passing. But my character is a cleric. He's a priest. He serves a goddess. And the thing is, though, I was always inspired by Aslan being the name of Christ in Narnia. So I'm going to infuse elements of my Christian belief and my how I relate to God in this other being, this other goddess. It's a fictional character. It's a goddess of the light and sunlight. So I keep thinking about illumination and lighting the light. I can't say, my path is lit before me that I have to travel. And I start, it almost sounds like Psalms the way I'm doing things. But there is another god in the game called Bright Mantle. And Bright Mantle, when I hear the dungeon master say the words that Bright Mantle is saying, I'm like, that sounds like something God would say, And so in a way, we are kind of mixing allegory into our game. When I hear people say things, I see and hear the Christian person behind that, the moral, upstanding person behind that. And there's been some very emotional times in the game where your ability to care for another character, I can see the person behind that. They're caring in the real world. Like I said before, group matters. And if you share similar viewpoints and worldviews, it does help. It can help. There's I would say more of a comfort level that you can have with that.
Kind of just reminds me of the workplace. How many jobs, if you're surrounded by great people that are similar in drive and motivation to you, then you can have a great experience doing just about anything. But you could be in your absolute dream job, loving what you do, but the people that you're around are just toxic, or they love drama, or just making big deals out of nothing.
Or bad jokes.
Yeah,
And
and yeah, the language and just the environment that you're in because of the people can make your dream job feel like torture. So that's just what it reminds me of, any
it's collaborative.
yeah,
Role playing games are collaborative. If you can't feel like you can collaborate with other people,
it's about the group.
there are toxic players, though. There's stories all over the internet of somebody
Mhm.
who says, "No, this is what's going to happen with my character. My character would definitely steal everything from your character and stab you in the back or something." I'm like, I don't know about that. If you have a conversation ahead of time, I think a lot of those issues can be worked out. And you have to learn how to communicate with each other. That's a big thing. Even people who are neurotypical have trouble communicating and need to, because you're going to get into and you know what? If you're having trouble with a group, disband the group. There's other players who will play
Or
with you.
set clear boundaries and be
At
willing
the beginning,
to,
yes.
yeah, but it's dealing with people just like anything. Friendships, workplace relationships, D&D games, whatever you're doing, it really does teach you how to function in life and have fun at the same time doing it. I mean, what could be better?
Yeah, and honestly, there have been some really good moments. And sometimes my dungeon master's probably watching this, but sometimes when characters go shopping for magical items and armor and weapons and stuff like that for the next battle, I kind of go, "Hmm, I don't like shopping. My life is shopping. I'm always going to Walmart or I'm going to Kroger and there's a list and I have to do it and I'm doing it for my family and I push through, but I don't like shopping. So hey, it's okay. DM, you guys do you and I'll support you, but I don't like shopping scenes. They're not my jam. I do like emotional scenes. Those are fun, where you're really kind of just you're sinking your teeth into the dramatic meat. And the games that I play, there's part of me that goes into a character, and I would sacrifice myself for my family. If it came down to my life and my family's life, I'd lay my life down. And I find that aspect of my personality is in my character. I believe that if it came down to it, my character would sacrifice his life dramatically for his friends. And of course, you're saying, well, that's just a character. You're not really losing anything. I've been playing this character for 2, 3 years. So the tears will be had.
What do you do when you're playing a villain? Like, what's the purpose of? I mean, for a story, right? You need to have villains. Are they?
But your players,
I'm
they're
sure you have situations where players
you
want to
can
be the
play you
villain.
can play criminals.
What does that do, though?
Well,
Is there
it's
a?
better to play an anti-hero where you kind of have those, because the thing is, if you're all criminals, you're going to work against each other, and sometimes people like that. But I've seen too many stories of game groups where they're just purely selfish and criminal, and it falls apart. You have to have some element of where they're like, oh, I got to do this heist because I got bills to pay and stuff. And maybe you put a scene in there where there's a little kid and they go, hey, let's let them leave the bank. I know we're taking hostages. Let's let them go. So you have those good elements.
Throw you back to our villains episode a little bit,
A
where we
little
were
bit.
talking about, because
I don't play villains, and in all the games I've ever played, we don't do that.
But that's the thing, though,
it's
is
just
if you
doesn't
are
feel
going
right.
to have someone playing a villain character,
It's usually the dungeon master.
then you need to still have a moral compass where the villain is defeated, where the villain is portrayed in a bad light, where the villain is not kind of glorified and given, and has so much empathy around them that you start calling bad good.
That has in all the times that I've played role playing games, that has never happened so far. So good,
Well,
and
but
that's because we have a
you have a
good
good
trust.
team. But
You have
that's
to
the
trust
thing.
your dungeon
I'm
master.
sure you have situations where that's happened,
There's
and
some moral ambiguity in terms of like this villain who's just doing the best he can for. But that's the thing. All
but
the
that
best
goes back
villains, yeah,
to, any time that you have something like this where
right.
there's a level of freedom, it is all about the people that you're with, and then the boundaries that you set and for those players.
Those when they say the villain you love to hate. We have a couple of those in our game that we're playing, and it makes you just want to go like, I want to stop them. They're hurting people. They are despicable, and they doesn't go into detail about real world horrors that a real evil person would do. It's just, this is a bad guy or bad girl, and they need to be taken down. And how do we do that? Whenever we do take them out, whatever that means, everyone is going to like, yes. But there are some characters who are misunderstood in this, and they need to be redeemed and saved. I can think of at least 3 or 4, right now. And we don't want to defeat them, but we do want to save them if we can. That's what makes for good drama. And I think my daughter would agree, because some of those characters are connected with her character. I do believe you do need to trust your dungeon master. You do need to trust them that they are going to be fair, but they're gonna push where they need to push and be fair when they can. And it's not personal. They're not doing things out of, I want to lord it over you. They don't take the word master, meaning, I'm master over you. It's mastery of the game rules. I know how they work. It's more like a narrator and a referee put together in some ways. The dungeon master usually plays the villain because but they also play the bartender down the street or the lady and the merchant. They have to do all those little voices. So it's probably the hardest role in a role playing game is the dungeon master. Yeah, it's not easy. And
I knew that.
thank you to dungeon masters who have that empathy, but also can play those characters to the hilt. You mentioned something earlier. You talked about Lord of the Rings and how you read that when you were in your parents' house. The Lord of the Rings are probably one of the biggest inspirations for fantasy, but not just that, Dungeons and Dragons too. Because the Fellowship is nothing but a Dungeons and Dragons party. I mean, you've got the rank. There's even a class of there's Ranger. Where do you think the class of Ranger in Dungeons and Dragons came from? Came
Mhm.
from Aragorn, Strider. So you've got a Ranger, you've got an Elven Archer, you have a Wizard, a Mage, and you've got
Dwarf.
burglar. I guess he would be even would be Bilbo if you think about from the earlier book. And like I said before, if fantasy is not your bag, there's Star Wars. This is the D20 rules of Star Wars role playing game. It uses similar rules to the Dungeons and Dragons, and it's got starships. It's got TIE fighters. Woo! So anyway, if you're into that, there's games for that, and you can find those online. That's one of the hardest things people have is to find a group. A lot of people during the pandemic got into playing RPGs online because you can play it online. You don't have to deal with the whole thing about the pandemic. You can be holed up in your house and still play, and people did. It can be a way to connect with people that you can't really be around. It can be done at a distance. I still recommend around a table is the best. The best is around a table with friends and Doritos and Mountain Dew. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
No, that's what they used to play with. But now we can play with healthy snacks. But around a table is the best. Board games or RPGs. That's the if you can do that, play it that way. It's loads of fun.
Just be careful not to end up in the upside down.
And I will tell you, some people did get exposed to what Dungeons and Dragons was from Stranger Things. They were like, "What is this?"
Mm,
And if you want a little bit of a taste of that, it's not exactly how games are, but it's close.
that one gets so scary.
It does get scary.
I feel like we're saying that there's a whole lot of good from RPGs that can be had. There's some bad that can happen, but it really is there's so much in your hands. It's about how you play the game, the group that you choose to play it with. There's nothing in it that has to be bad or evil or toxic in any
Are you
way.
moral? Do you have a
It's
soul?
what you
Bring
bring
that to the
into
game.
it. Yeah.
Yes, bring that to the game.
And there's so much flexibility within it that it's like if there's certain aspects that you don't want to play or that other players aren't comfortable with, you can leave those out very
You
easily.
absolutely can. And you can draw those boundaries very early
Mhm.
on. The more social groups got, the more people thought about who am I playing with? Let me think about is what does somebody deal with? So over the years, the game has evolved and changed as a social medium. And I think that we can evolve with it and see and take advantage of some of those good things in it and point it towards good, point it towards those things and not miss out on some good elements just because of some past controversies that had some truth to them, but a lot of misinformation. If we are to treat those games the same way we would do our fantasy, we would be burning those books instead. And a lot of people did. If you watched our episode on Magic and Christians, you probably can realize where we stand on fantasy and science fiction and things like that, and how we have both Rachel and I have contextualized them in our lives and our lives of our kids. So you could probably see where where we kind of land on the RPG thing. I think honestly, you have to just look at what you're looking at. What's in it?
With everything, be wise, have guidelines that are based on God's word and how the Holy Spirit directs you. Because that's one of the things when you have His Spirit that can give you kind of that leading in that direction of like, well, I'm not comfortable with that. I feel like that there's just something not right. And you listen to that and you swerve, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's good in that. You had fun talking about your hobby.
A little too much sometimes.
I hope that this has been interesting to somebody, maybe people that are just like, all about RPGs and you're just going, yeah, 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 totally. Or if this is not something, maybe you were where I was before I met this wonderful geek here and just didn't know what they were about, had maybe heard some of the negatives from, before, but didn't realize what the potential was there. And I think that's one of the things that, just seeing the potential for learning, for storytelling, for using your imagination and being able to have this vehicle for just the ordinary person to tell a story. Most people, you've got the writers and the authors that they're living in their world of imagination all the time, but for the normal person, what opportunities do they have to do that? So being able to explore that and have that structure and that environment to be able to really kind of escape the world in an entirely different way than reading a book or watching a movie. It's being part of telling that story and writing that world.
As you go.
And as you go, and you never know where you're going to end up with or what the entire point of it is until you
Right.
get to it. Escaping the world, and you can't just flip to the end and read the last chapter of the book.
No, you can't.
You you can't just zoom through. It's something that, it can be years in the making. Like you guys have been going for a long time.
There have been
And
some legendary role playing game campaigns, as they call them. There's one that actually went for 40 years or 30 years.
wow.
Well, I mean, had characters grow old and they had kids and their grandkids fought. So it's just it's epic.
And so maybe if you're a parent and you have kids that are interested in it and you don't know whether that's something that you want to allow or not, I hope maybe this is something that can help to just maybe, expose you to what the possibilities are, give you some kind of guidelines to fall into, because it is going to be for your kids too, is making sure, well, what are the rules, what are you allowing, who are the people that you're playing with, what are their value systems, are they good and appropriate for what you're comfortable with. And but not to be afraid of it, because there's a lot of good in there.
And if you're
So with
curious where to
that,
start with, drop us a line in the comments. I can guide you to some really good starting points that you can kind of dip your toe in, or just some videos to watch to kind of get an idea. There's plenty of podcasts out there that where people actually play this game online, and you can, if you don't know what it is, you can kind of get a good idea of what it is very quickly. We're gonna say goodnight, and I hope that all your roles in life are 20s.
all right.
Bye.